Hello, everyone. Dr. Allen here. Hope you are having a great week. Um, this class is flying by. I can't believe we're on week five. As always, I want to thank you all. One, because I know it's a short class and I feel like I'm just dumping information sometimes on you. The work and the assignments have been great. Hopefully, by the time you watch this on Sunday afternoon, of course, our official date on Monday morning, um, the grades should be up to date. Also, I wanted to thank you. I don't think I've actually taken the time to thank everyone. I've been trying to do some little different assignments and just new technologies just to kind of freshen things up from my point of view. So, as always, I'd just like to thank everyone for bearing with that and kind of rolling with the punches. Everything, like I say, has been great. But with all that being said, let me go ahead and jump right in. And this week, we're going to go on syllabus two. I think I was looking at the course description again for some reason this week, and this week ties into it heavily. But one of the things with this class is the historical and philosophical aspects of curriculum and theories and trends and structure and things like that. Um, what we're going to look at this week is actually related to controversies and things of that nature and how that affects curriculum. And when I say controversies, there's political controversies, there's Supreme Court decisions, there's state government decisions, there's just topical controversies. So we're going to look at a few, talk about how to handle it. If you need to handle anything at all, I'm sure you already have it under control, and just kind of get a little bit together and talk about this week's assignment. So let me go ahead and roll down here to week five. You'll probably notice when we're in this, I've been loading stuff up. I gotta watch. I know I'm guilty of this, and I apologize again. I try to bring in all the curriculum. Um, I was catching myself getting a little social studies with this week, and I pulled myself back. But I have a few things on here that we can kind of look at in terms of some topics that have come up in the recent years. We'll also look at the controversy project that you have to do. It sounds fancy. It's pretty straightforward. And I also have a little folder up here. I'll come back to these, but some things that I might help you if you're looking for a topic to write about or present about. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and click our this week's PowerPoint. And let me go ahead and pull that up. And as you can see, this is a very short PowerPoint because a lot of this I want to jump back and forth with what's on Brightspace. But, when we're talking about controversial topics and curriculum for this class and for the assignment, it can be big or it can be little. It can be topics about free speech. It can be as it has on there, global warming, gun control, abortion. These are all very controversial topics that you have to either teach or sometimes they're even in the curriculum because, again, there might be things like if you're teaching science, topics about global warming. A lot of people that's an extremely important topic to a lot of people. Of course, there's some people that have different opinions on it. I'm not here to debate that right in this lecture because one, we're not face to face, and two, I'm recording, and three, I try to keep these kind of short as best I can. I know how to fail, but again, it's controversial because there's debate about it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Same thing with gun control, death penalty, things like that. Those are just specific topics. We're not even getting into, and you can look at these things like Brown versus Board of Education, Plessy versus Ferguson. I'm going to show you a little tool that's on that I posted as far as looking at different Supreme Court decisions. If you want to kind of look at it in that right and some of that and how that affected curriculum. So, and again, here's some other things: evolution, sex education, race, climate change. These are all things that are, can affect curriculum and how we teach it, how much, how little. And again, I kind of already said this, but it comes back to those political divides, religious beliefs, ethical dilemmas. These all fall into what makes things controversial. It's what makes things difficult to teach. These are the tough things to talk about. Um, I don't know. I don't. If anyone takes their methods class, a lot of times, or if you've had a methods class, which I'm assuming everyone has, these are things that you kind of get into and you talk about. I know in my social studies methods class, we talk a lot about how do you approach these topics. What's the best way to do it? What's the strategies? And I have actually threw a few up if you're interested. But again, any of these would be good topics for the controversial project. And one thing there can be a strong case to be made for teaching tough topics, or including them in curriculum. In terms of teaching, uh, you know, looking at things from different sides. That's critical thinking. Um, it's participation again, debating, talking about it, being respectful. Um, Also, it helps build empathy. We'll talk about that with a couple of other things that I have on there, and of course, it expands your intellectual curiosity. Again, I'm sounding like, and I am definitely falling into this vortex a little bit of talking about specific topics. You can do that, but again, we can also think bigger. Like I said, I talked about Plessy versus Ferguson. That was a definite decision that affected curriculum. And of course, in 1954, Brown versus Board changed a lot of things, um, big things. So again, you can think big. You can also, I have a listing, I'll pull it up here in a minute, but even recent things with the Department of Education, a lot of the DEI stuff that's been coming and going in schools. I know, well, on a college level, there's been a lot of changes related to the DEI and affecting how we I think it indirectly affects curriculum, which means that it directly affects it. I hope that makes sense. And I think a similar thing is happening at the county level where there's a trickle down effect. I don't know if I articulated that very well, but that is something you can definitely look at. Um, you know, there are people that say that you should steer clear of tough topics. They're tough to talk about, and maybe you don't want to upset anyone. Sometimes it's not worth. There's a saying. I listen to a podcast. It's a sports podcast, but one of the gentlemen on there a lot of times says, "Is the juice worth the squeezing?" And is it worth getting into the headaches of having a lot of emails, calls, having to defend yourself if you're teaching tough topics? There's also the preparation. You got to make sure you know all sides so you can debate, and you got to determine how you're going to approach it. Are you going to be an activist when you're talking about a tough topic, or are you going to be like kind of that devil's advocate, or are you going to have that omnipresent type approach? And also, I've mentioned this already. When you start talking about these things, I mentioned global warming. Time constraints are tricky because you want to look at it from all sides, but you have to make sure that you can fit it in because some of these topics could be classes in and of themselves. And especially in the K to 12 world, you're very limited, but also in the college setting. I mean, I just mentioned it. My gosh, we're on week 5 here. So, and of course, I included this one when I was looking for images to include. I thought this is not a political thing, but the Trump factor is it looms large, and I guess the easiest thing I can say is Trump in and of himself is a controversial topic because there's strong feelings on both sides related to him and his approach to things. And honestly, Trump's administration is actually something you can look at. You could look at any presidential administration in terms of curriculum, and I'll throw out a few here in a minute. But again, related to the Department of Education and trying to give the power back to the states, is that a good thing or bad thing? If you remember last week when we talked about Finland, they're a little more nationalistic, and it seems like it works for them. Would that work in the United States? But you could also look at things like, the Common Core or No Child Left Behind. These are all policies that were very, very influential and controversial at the same time, and they did affect curriculum, and some of it was test-based type approaches. So anyway, those are a few. And is that my? Yep, nope. I do have a couple more slides. There's different ways in terms of teaching. I have a whole list I'll show you here in a second, but a few I threw out here. I think using primary sources is always a good thing when you're looking at issues and having it look at, at the time what the feelings were and then talking about it. Make sure that you always have ground rules when you're talking about instructional purposes, when you're talking about controversial topics. You can connect it to current events. I think connecting to current events is shared experiences is always important. And, make sure that it is a safe environment where you can listen to all voices. I used to tell my students it's a safe spot, but please, 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 please make sure that you're respectful to everyone. And that was one thing I stressed, and I'm trying to word this the best way I can. I strictly enforced that respect was the thing. So anyway, those are some effective teaching strategies. And of course, in terms of trying to lessen the risk to you if you're talking about controversial topics, if it's standard base, that's important. And a lot of times it's kind of on here, but make sure if it's something you're not totally comfortable with or you want to teach it, but you're not for sure how it can be, of course, you can reach out to your parents. Always check with your administration too, or give them the heads up at least that you're going to do something. And as you can see, I got a little word web there for curriculum, but I think the same applies to controversial topics in terms of curriculum. These are all things you have to do. You have to study, you have to know the basics, you got to think of the student, the school, things like that. Um, but that's kind of the PowerPoint on a very, very quick basis. This is posted if you want to check it out. I am going to shorten this back up. Boop. And if you look here, I did throw some instructional approaches here, just in case you're interested in terms of teaching some controversial things. As you can see, debates are always good. There was one down here. There was role playing. I did want to make a point about role playing because this is one I've seen a lot of students do, and I will be the first to admit I did not do a lot of role playing situations when I was a teacher in terms of classroom instruction, mainly because I worried. I taught middle school most of my career. I did do a little bit of high school and such, but I wanted. I didn't want to lose if it was a tough topic or it was a serious topic. I didn't want to lose the seriousness of the topic. That might be just the way I set up my classes. I'm not saying not to do it, but I just always remember attending something at the Holocaust Museum, and when you would teach the Holocaust, especially to like seventh graders, it's a pretty, it's a tough topic to kind of get across. And I remember them talking about they had had some people say that they did role playing. I just think that there's a chance that maybe it can be taken a little too lighthearted by students, not on purpose. So that was one I always kind of steered clear from. But it's on the list because I know some teachers do like it. But I would really stress making sure you have clear boundaries and expectations established. And as you can see, there's a few on here. Sorry, I thought I had bold all these. I'll go back through and clean this up before I post it. I was kind of fighting a cat before, believe it or not, before I got this on here. Not really. He was wanting snacks. Uh, but anyway, got distracted there. There's a few things here, building the empathy. I do think the empathy is a big thing. Um, I know I've heard someone on the news talking about how empathy is a weak thing and all. I do not agree with that. I think it helps understanding different sides to things. No matter, there's a lot of things that I don't agree with that are going on now, but I do try to see things from a different point of view. I may still not agree with it, but I do think there's something to it. One thing I do like to do, you can set it up different ways. I'm a big proponent of the 3-2-1 approach. Like I always try to think about, what are takeaways, two questions, and one thing I enjoyed from a discussion. Sometimes I'll do, what are three things I learned, two things I found interesting, and one question. I used to do that a lot for exit tickets. Even when I do observations now, I kind of do a 3-2-1 as far as if I'm listening to a lecture, three things that I learned from that lecture, two things I found interesting, and one question I have for the student. So it's just another approach I threw out there if you're interested. The list is here. I'm not going to go down them because I think everyone in this class pretty much does teach. So I'm sure you have your own thing. And if something's complex, though, I would make sure that you break it down. That is one, sometimes I think the one thing I see today that drives me a little bonkers across all curriculum. I think we want students to go so fast and get through, and we're so worried about where they are. We're not worried about whether they sometimes know the content. And what I mean by that is know it well, because I think I'm picking on this discipline. Please don't think that I'm not saying that this is not a knock on teaching or anyone like that. But like I always think sometimes like I'll hear students say, well, they're in seventh grade or eighth grade, and they're like, well, I'm in geometry. That's awesome, but sometimes I do wonder. When I was going to school, there was very, very, very few kids who were in geometry. Now everyone's in it, and maybe the students do know it better than I think they do. But it just seems like maybe we're doing that to check a box more than making sure they know it. Again, personal opinion. I'm not saying that's not a knock on anyone's teaching. You can only teach what standards you have and who you're told to teach. Um, But again, going back to those complex topics, when you're dealing with these topics, you've got to make sure that they're well detailed and there's a firm understanding. You've got to do the groundwork. You got to make the students do the homework before you hammer it. Again, these are just in terms of instructional. I'll come back and talk about the assignment itself and maybe some of the bigger picture stuff. I have some things up here. If you're interested, just some modern type stuff. If you look here, I'll do this one first. I'm talking like I had it filled out and then I chickened out, and it's not even an expensive book, but I didn't want anyone to have to buy two books for the class. Um, there's a very famous book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's by a gentleman named James Loewen. It is definitely more of a I don't want to say it. It's more of a sociology type book. Um, he was a sociologist, and it talks about a lot of the ways we teach and topics we teach, and how we only do it from one point of view. He talks about, even though in this it's supposed to be kind of groundbreaking, he talks about John Brown a lot and how he's not taught in schools. Of course, in West Virginia, he's taught in a great deal, but he gets into that, and he also talks about things like Thanksgiving, why we don't talk about Latin American curriculum. And I'm not just talking social studies, just in general, like stories. We don't read anything. And when I mean Latin America specifically, he talks about South America, Central America. As you can see, there's an overview. He talks about Helen Keller, and we don't talk about her political stance. I'm going to say he alludes that she's a communist. She definitely was seemed to be a socialist. And I'm not here to debate the merits of that. It's just something that doesn't come up, and a lot of that is probably because of the way we portray things and what he calls hero history. Long story short, it's a very interesting book. There are things in there I definitely agree with. There are things in there that I definitely do not. But if you ever have the opportunity, you can check it out. And actually, if you don't want to buy it, this wonderful platform called YouTube actually has some a little preview from Google Books on here. If you have audio, it's definitely in there. But I put the audio preview in there. I think it's about an hour long. You don't have to listen to it, but if you want to just listen to sections of it, it's pretty interesting, I think. But that's up. Another thing that you can look at, actually, I'll touch on this because you may have noticed a quote from Howard Zinn on the Lies My Teacher Told Me page. Howard Zinn, if you've ever seen the book Good Will Hunting, and I should have it, I'm actually recording down in my office, and I don't have the book is actually in my Shepherd office. He wrote a book called A People's History of the United States. They reference it in Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon tells Robin Williams' character about reading it, and it really is just trying to talk a little bit about the people's history of the United States. And what it is instead of doing again that hero history, it does it from more common person's point of view. Now, I keep saying history, but this page that I have here actually has a lot of stuff in different disciplines, and you can do little searches if you're looking for something. But you can do time periods, theme, African American history. James Loewen. I'm getting sidetracked, but it actually has it on the Zim project too. They have a lot on the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, which is it's an important event in women's history because of the work conditions that a lot of women were under in the early 20th century. They talk about that, but as you can see, it can get into different types of topics. You can do different grades. You can look at it, from poster songs and such. And a lot of these have like a science tilt to them or a math tilt. It's a cool page. I thought I would throw it on here if you're looking for something maybe a little outside the box. Clear that off on my page. I also included probably if I don't know if anyone remembers. Well, you remember the pandemic, but right before the pandemic occurred, there was a major event that was coming in terms of like teaching literature, teaching social studies, teaching how we approached all of our content areas in terms of the history of the United States and how the curriculum and state standards should be affected. It was called the 1619 Project. I have a summary on here, but basically it kind of says that that's when the first slaves came to the United States, and a lot of states started to adopt this curriculum. And this is where I'm talking about the bigger affecting, more direct things. It was a very controversial thing. Some states did, some states didn't. Some actually said they would never do it. Some said, they took aspects of it. Again, I'm putting it up here for you to decide, but if you want to check it out, I do have the New York Times, like, it did win the Pulitzer. I have the article that was actually first put out here if you want to check it out, if you're not already familiar with it. And also, I have a little debate thing. I'm going to make sure this is up in the resources, but it will be in there. This was just a debate that had, it's about an hour, a little over an hour long, if you want to check it out, on the pros and cons of the 1619 project. But it did have an influence, or at least a lot of debate within how it should be incorporated into curriculum, a curriculum controversy. Um, Finally, you will notice, I think I have some on here. Yep. And when I have the list here, I put Supreme Court cases because these decisions do affect curriculum. And as you can see on here, there's a lot: Brown versus Board of Education, religious freedom, Plessy versus Ferguson. But these are all different education type um, rulings. Tinker versus Des Moines is a big one. I've actually seen that in some AP Civics classes. That's a first free speech thing, as far as like how students can protest in the classroom environment. You can check out any of these. Wisconsin versus Yoder, which has to deal with parental rights. These all, to me, do affect curriculum, and you're welcome to do it. You can also look at DEI funding type things. Um, I know we have a couple people who teach at the college level. I think a lot of this, please, you're welcome to research some things that actually affect what you're doing at your level in terms of education. And though you may not have a specific state curriculum that's given to you, you definitely have guidelines that you have to operate under in terms of policy. You're welcome to kind of look at that, or you can be very field specific if you want. Um, but again, they're here. And actually, I put this up here. This is a really cool link. It's a Oyes. I think I always say that correctly, I think. But what you can do is you can look up specific cases. So let me look here. I'm going to just do, I mean, since it's probably one of the, if the most famous case, but Brown versus Board. And when we hit that, if you look here, let's hit Brown versus Board of Education. It'll give you a whole background on the case if you're interested in any of those cases and how they affect curriculum. It gives you the facts on the case, maybe what the case does, and it actually shows you who voted for and who voted against, if they're in and such. And that's kind of it. And that was a unanimous decision, so they all voted for it. But that's there if you want to check out a little more on the details of the case. I feel like, again, I always feel like I'm just dumping information on you. You are welcome to check out everything that is on here, but I want to talk a little bit about the assignment for this week. Let's go back up to start here just to go over everything. If you look, discussion four was last week. This week is just the controversy project. I know I posted it last week, so you may have a head start on this a little bit. And next week is when we're going to talk about the paper, the research paper, but it is already up. It is due on the 22nd. But let me go here and kind of pull up some stuff. I should, again, while I'm pulling up the other things, I will probably have the Wakelets posted, hopefully by the time you watch this. The Controversy Project. Now, here's what we're looking for. Let me move my little name face thing out of there. I'll try not to read too much verbatim, but I'm going to kind of go with it just to make sure we're all on the same page. There's a lot of things that can affect the climate of a school, a classroom, or educational community. For this assignment, you're going to pick a political issue, a teaching topic, a cultural topic, a historical event that can influence the educational climate on a large scale. Yes, current, recent events are fine and definitely important to look at. So, what do you need to do? You need to pick some sort of, I'm going to say controversial. It's the best way I can say it. If there's something where there's various sides on it, and select that topic, and you're going to create a PowerPoint and summarize it. You're going to create a 10 to 15 slide PowerPoint in which you present the background of this, the context of it, why it's controversial. I'm going to kind of let you freeform a little bit. I'm not going to be picky in terms of the setup. There is a rubric up, and I will actually make sure that I have it uh, posted for you. One thing that is on there, you know what? I could kick myself because I think I may have it up here. And let me see. Do I have it? Oh, there it is. I will have I say I don't have a layout. I do have a suggested layout. So just to kind of help you out, I know someone was probably going to, well, I would want one. So sorry. I almost freeformed it. I didn't. I take that back. I did work on this. Did this last week when I sent it. Duh. Anyway, sorry. It's been a long day. Um, as you can see, here's the setup. I will post this up so you have it. But as you can see, I do want 5 sources and make sure it's an APA format. And that's kind of it. Main thing, you pick your topic. It can be debating key topics in math. It could be a bigger topic. Make sure you have the title in there. You have a hook, an objective. As long as you have all of this, you should be fine. There's the breakdown of the rubric. Um, but that's kind of it. I'll email this out today, or well, the day that I publish everything, so everyone has an overview of what you need to do. And sorry, I've got a little tongue tied there. I do have a template, and I said I didn't, and I'm totally wrong on that, and I apologize. But that, let me go back here. I do have a listing of topics. Again, you can go as broad or as narrow as you'd like, as long as you're kind of addressing all of that. So, oh, there it is. I've chickened out. I didn't scroll down. I was like, did I not put the template? I did. But there you go. So again, that's the week. I thought I had a pretty smooth run there until the end when I got a little tongue tied. Uh, I want to thank you all again for bearing with us. If you've listened to this to the end, this will be posted, but this is the only assignment that's due this week, and it's due. And then next week we'll talk about the paper. But again, pick something. I would pick something that's in your area. I just think that helps make things a lot more interesting for everyone and a little more bearable. So, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and tell everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you.